and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we've got an absolute treat for you. In this one, we are interviewing basically the entire filmmaking team of Rebel Hearts, which is a documentary about this group of nuns in Los Angeles back in the 60s, who were basically, as I described them, the most punk rock ladies in town. They all had PhDs. They were all rallying against the system. The church was trying to take them down, and they were saying no. I try to keep these intros very short, so I'm not going to get into too much detail about the film plot-wise. All I can do is tell you to absolutely seek it out and watch it. If you go to rebelheartsfilm.com, you'll see festivals that they're going to be at, and then depending on when you listen to this, I'm sure it'll be available on streaming somewhere, maybe even Blu-ray. I would love to buy the Blu-ray. It is a fantastic documentary, really joyful, even though the subject matter of being oppressed to a degree is kind of a bummer. But really, these nuns are awesome. So, like I said, we've got a chunk of the team. We've got the director, Pedro Cos. We've got DP Emily Topper. We've got producer Judy Corin and animator Una Lorenzen. And it's a really great discussion of, half of a masterclass for documentary filmmaking. A lot of really great tidbits of knowledge that they all give. And so, really loved this conversation, and I hope you will enjoy it too. So I'm going to shut up and then immediately start talking 10 seconds after this. Please enjoy this interview with the team from Rebel Hearts. I was able to watch the film 2 nights ago, and me and my girlfriend absolutely loved it. I loved the motion graphics. First of all, Una, great job on all the animation and everything. It's super cool. But it's like, for being a kind of not a bummer subject, but it's such a fun. It made me feel good watching it. I enjoyed it. How did you guys get involved in this whole story, and what attracted you to it? We can start with Pedro.
Yeah, I guess I'll start because I've been on it a little longer, but not the longest actually. The project began actually over 2 decades ago with our amazing writer-producer Shawnee Isaac Smith, who began documenting these extraordinary women back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And really just with really the goal to make a film about it. And at that time, most of these extraordinary women were alive and well, and she was able to get these extraordinary first-hand accounts of their stories. Flash forward to a number of years later, I think it was 2014, that Shawnee connected with a dear friend of mine and collaborator and producer, Kira Carstensen, who saw basically a cut of basically an assembly of selects of these interviews of these, and immediately a light bulb went on in her head and said, there's something really special here. This is an extraordinary hidden gem that really had been sort of forgotten in time, and the stories of how of the awakening of this order of nuns, and sort of the brouhaha that it caused basically all around the world. And Kira, knowing me, and thought I would respond to this story, and she was very right. I fell in love with them, and actually, I think I challenge anyone to not fall in love with these women once you get to know them, and once you. And so I set about, was really inspired by it, and I remember at that time I was finishing. I was in the process of finishing a film called Bending the Arc, which I directed a few years ago, which Judy I was fortunate to be working with Judy, who was a producer on the film. And we were talking about a I came in and I started to talk about this order of extraordinary nuns, and then one of them was this icon of pop art, Corita Kent, and Judy lit up. Judy, who has an incredible eye and also a background in design, motion graphics, animation. Well, I'll let her tell the story from her end. So yeah, what did you think, Judy, when I said?
Yeah, I mean, when he said it's nuns with Corita, I knew Corita's art because I had studied graphic design. I had been working as a creative director and graphic designer, title designer for years. And so I knew Corita's work very well, but had no idea of the backstory. So when I heard the backstory from Pedro, I was like, you gotta let me work on this. And about a year or so later, maybe 2 years later, even in 2017, we started collaborating. So I came on board as a producer on the project, and I had produced a very low budget indie scripted feature in 2011, 2012 with a dear friend of mine, Ron Judkins, who wrote and directed it, and Jennifer Young, who produced it alongside me. And Ron had found Una through, I don't even know how, some delicious, kismet. And Una had done the animation on that film for us. It was a film about a graphic novelist. So when Pedro said, I want to do animation that's inspired by Corita, but not exactly Corita, and I said, you got to talk to Una. And then that relationship between director and animation director blossomed. Yeah,
it was love at first sight when I saw Una's extraordinary work. And one of the things that we wanted, I've been talking about there's a lot of different disparate elements in this film, from the beautiful footage of filmmakers like Bayless Glasscock and Tom Conrad and Haskell Wexler, who filmed at the Immaculate Heart College in the 1960s, to Shawnee's interviews, to documents, photographs. I mean, you name it. I think we have it in the film. Letters, and one of the ways, and I'm going to get back to Emily shortly, but one of the ways that we thought about, how to tell this story, visually in a way that feels very organic to it, right? And originally I was thinking, well, maybe some type of 8mm type recreations would be interesting. But then, we had a phrase in the edit room, which was, what would Corita do? That was sort of our motto. And, so much of Corita's artwork was dialoguing with the times. And we felt that it was the best, most organic thing to the story would be to actually animate it, really inspired by Corita's work. And that's when Una came in, and we talked about the artwork. And I want to hear from Una about that. But and then the other element, which is Emily, we started filming in 2017, and the goal of the filming was really, Emily and I had watched Bayless's footage and Tom Conrad's films and Haskell's films, and in a way it was really important to ground the film in the present, in the current day, because this is not only a story that sets in the 50s. I think it's very important for us to feel how current the story is today, to look at it with a current lens on events that, even though happened 50 years ago, are about who we are today as a society and the awakenings and the movements that we are having today. So that visually, that grounding, that anchor in the present was something that Emily and I talked a lot about. But now I'm going to shut up, and I want to hear from Una and Emily.
Yeah, so it was so. It was so easy. It's such a perfect way for me to come into this through Corita's work. Like the sequence that you proposed. It was just, it felt really natural just to kind of, I immediately, you immediately get going just looking at Corita's artwork. I also studied graphic design, and I always love, my style is usually kind of flat, graphic-y, and using mixed media. And I kind of immediately wanted to just kind of do something, she's doing these prints, and I just wanted it to feel like the prints were coming alive. And that was actually also kind of something that Judy and Pedro talked about, to kind of, we went, at least we tried out to go from her artwork to the animation, kind of like, so it was the initial concept was kind of just like this flat silk screen coming alive that's really inspired by Corita's, there's like a color scheme going on, so I was inspired by that. And then
I also noticed there was all the in the backgrounds of all the animations, all of the it looked like pages ripped from, I'm gonna guess, the Second Vatican.
Yes, so that is something that happened with this first sequence that I did for them, which was the Mary's Day sequence about Corita's artwork. And it was something that I just, I was so inspired by her work, and I wanted it, obviously that sequence was about Corita, and not all sequences are in the film. But so what I did, I just took her printed texts, which, she works with text so much. So I just really used that as a texture to just kind of, and that concept, from there on, it became a concept for all the animation sequences to kind of use text. Not only, for me, the initial thing was basically just using the texture of the text. It was like a handwritten text, but then that evolved, and it became actually about what the text is saying too. Well, it already was in some of the sequences, Corita sequences, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. And each animated sequence has a different text in it.
I was going to ask that.
So yeah, we like one, when they are becoming nuns, the very first one is the catechism of the vows that they're taking, right? Like you take your vows of marriage, but they took their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And so we took that text, which is like a long book of the catechism of the vows, and we did that. And then, when they are beginning to change and like take off the habit, it's the questionnaires that they had to fill out about why they were changing and all that. So there was, each sequence was a different, and then for the one that they passed their decrees, they're like basically their new constitution, that the text of those decrees are the texture that you're seeing. So each one is each sequence is incorporating the text and the paper texture of that of those specific documents that relate to that sequence. And one of the words that we had on making this film is we wanted to make it tactile. This was a time when creative work is done in layers. It's all very analog. It's all very paper. It's like I almost wanted to feel the texture of the paper in my hand. That was really, and the paint and the ink and everything, so the way we approached that both visually and also on the audio side was very much in trying to creating a tactile experience for the viewers.
Yeah, the sound design, actually, I remember thinking, I have a note here that it was evocative. I kept thinking like evocative, like everything was very, as you say, tactile is a great great word for it. Emily, what was your how did you approach this film? Because there is a lot of animation in it and also archival footage. Were you trying to kind of find a way to bridge that gap, or how did that work for you?
So I knew at the very beginning that this was going to be a collage of sorts, that I was going to be coming in and being one of the end of a very long line of contributors, many of whom are long gone, to make a film that they didn't even know they were going to be part of in 2021. And here I am coming along, kind of adding one more layer to it. And Pedro and I talked a lot about what the footage that he was having looked like and felt like. And a lot of times when we were on set, the subjects were sharing materials that they were giving Judy and Pedro, and they were kind of taking in stuff, and I would look at it and see a little bit about. So I was understanding what I hadn't yet seen, but what really I was standing on top of. And I think what we did just instinctively was just have an incredibly simple approach. It wasn't really, from my perspective, it wasn't really driven by, okay, let's figure out exactly what we want this to look like because we know what the footage looks like. So now let's sort of retroactively design what every shot's going to be. It was more driven by what the relationship needs were during the filmmaking. Here we were coming into a community as total newcomers. And even though I live in Los Angeles and in fact live close to all these people and these places, it was like entering into a very foreign land. And for me, and wanting to be extremely sensitive to the group, as you can see from watching the film, these women do not suffer fools, aren't going to tolerate any sort of excessive, unnecessary fluttering around them, or they may tolerate it for a minute, but later will rescind some of the access that we would potentially get. So it was just this feeling of wanting to go in there in as at least obtrusive way as possible, and then knowing, kind of having the confidence from working with Pedro on many projects before, that a simple approach was going to be okay, that we could that we didn't need to overly polish anything or overthink anything, that we could show up in someone's apartment, use the natural light, embrace it for what it was, not get really, not rearrange all the furniture, not get really obsessive about what something behind the person's head was going to look like, just like flow, go with it, just whatever it was, go with it. It's not to say that we didn't try to futz things, but we had to be very, very low key and not crazy about it. Some documentary directors will really want to control everything, and some films will allow that, and then other films won't allow it. And my experience of this film was that we needed to not try to control everything and to go with it, and just recognize that it was like a gift to even be there and just shoot it as authentically, and just try to witness it for what it was, not try to change it, not try to interfere, not try to add a layer of something that was cool. Just, it was what it was.
Yeah. So were you showing up with like any grip or lights at all, or was it just in situ? Let's figure this out. Location?
We always had stuff with us, but we oftentimes didn't bring it in. We would go inside, take a look, see if we could get away without bringing anything in. Invariably, we would bring in, something to hold. We would have a few things. I think we ended up doing interviews with one single light, and we always use available light and use that light in addition to it. It was like a Diva, a Kino, 400, just something really simple. So yes, but it wasn't the kind of thing where we would load in. In fact, we wouldn't at all. It's like everything's in the car. We go in, keep it really small, and if we really, really need that light, we go back and get it, quietly without bringing it. But there's certainly not a lot of extra hands, no PAs, no lighting person, just us.
Sure.
Often it was just the two, either, Pedro and Emily or me and Emily, and or the three of us, and, one of us doing sound. Sometimes we had the benefit of a sound person when it was complicated, but often it was just really, really small footprint.
and Emily and I would go in for a reconnaissance mission, to scope out, see what, and then really only bring what the equipment that was necessary. And I have to. Emily has the most extraordinary gift to, for all great doc DPs, is to listen. A great doc DP not only is looking through the viewfinder, but is also listening. We would have discussions before, if it was a verite scene, of like what things really to look out for to, and Emily is so in tune and so focused and really so her antenna is extraordinary, and also at the same time to become invisible. So Emily really becomes invisible, and the footage that she's filming is just so. It sounds, how she says it sounds, effortless, and she makes it look effortless, but the footage is gorgeous. I mean, the way the framing and how her choice of lenses and how to really capture with such a beautiful humanity, even in the most sort of simple ways. Emily is able to find that extraordinary, beautiful humanity in the simplest details.
Totally.
And it cuts together really well too.
Yes.
It's always important.
Even better.
So what was the shooting package? Obviously I can't imagine you were in there with, you're saying you're trying to keep it light. So I think you're shooting probably Canon.
We were shooting on Canon C300 Mark II, and we shot a combination of the L series zooms and primes. In general, for stuff like this, we would always try to be on a prime, because a lot of times the environments are darker and you don't want to go in there and change it if you don't have to. But we were, depending on the scene, we'd spent a whole lot of time on the 70 to 200 in some of the really big, when they're all together in these big meeting spaces. I don't think it made it into the film, but we shot at a really important funeral. And, I was on the longest lens I had access to for that I could handle by myself, because I wanted to stay out of the way. And there's so much of the photography of this was really shaped by what would work for the women, not just women, what would work for this community, what could we do that would honor what they were doing and capture it honestly, but that didn't take away from why they were really there, which was to be together with each other. And not to ever become like a distraction, or try not to.
I used to shoot concerts a lot. And the one thing I learned was, I've always shot on an 18 to 35 historically. And so I'm usually in there. And I found that I accidentally took musicians out of what they were doing on stage by being too close. Mm-hmm. And that's like the worst feeling in the world, because that's not what you're there for. They're there for the audience. You're there. Mm-hmm. The fly on the wall thing is huge. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these women were a lot like musicians in a way. I mean, I keep saying women. There are lots of men too, but there's just something about what they were doing together that's just was so profound to me. And this feeling of like, not wanting to do something that would take away from that, and just be like a bother, it's like being in a church, you just don't want to be doing something that affects somebody, that would take them out of something that's important like that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that now that we're talking about musicians, because I did write down these are punk rock nuns, like 100%. They're the definition of punk, you keep with. That was the other thing too. It didn't really occur to me until I was, we were farther along in the documentary, but I was like, they're not. Someone brings up the question like, oh, so you've left the church, in an interview, I believe, and she's like, no, we're still essentially nuns. We're just not attached to that system that we don't agree with,
Exactly.
And I thought that was really cool, because I'm not particularly religious, but that was it made me feel closer to them in a way.
Yeah, they saw beyond the institution, but their faith and what moves them. That's the beauty of it. It was not confined to an institution. They're very much about very social justice driven, very open and progressive and inclusive, and that's what they felt called to do. And if the institution, at the end of the day, I think they grew beyond the institution as the institution was beginning to change, and then had like, oh well, actually no, that's too much. But they kept with it, and they're still trailblazing. But yeah, it is that sort of punk rock spirit of re-questioning. That they were Rosa, one of the who was now Roman Catholic woman priest and was educated by them. They said they were always teaching critical thinking, to question authority, and that's so punk rock. I mean, like question, like this critical thinking and questioning authority, and questioning the world around you, and being part of the world. I think is, as you said, totally punk rock.
Yeah, and the other thing that was sort of, I this might be highlighting my ignorance, but that, like, is it kind of wild that they all had PhDs, like just the smartest women in Los Angeles, like all in one spot?
It's in the 1960s. This was very rare. This was not. They had more degrees amongst them than all the priests in Los Angeles, and they. That's one of the things that, again, going back to the punk rockness of them, they were very determined to educate their sister to that every sister was trained to be the best teacher professor possible, and that if that meant getting a PhD from Stanford or Columbia or wherever, that's what they would do. They would send the sisters out to other institutions to get these advanced degrees, to tertiary, secondary, and tertiary degrees, and so they could come back to Immaculate Heart College and teach there. That was really, I mean, there were other orders of sisters, I think, around the country that were doing that, but they were one of the most well-educated group of sisters in the United States at that time. It was really something really special and rare.
And they did it to fulfill their own potential, but also for the potential of their students. They really felt that part of their social justice work was, a major component was education. That was the roots of their order when it was founded in the 1800s in Spain. It was all about education. So they really, it's in their DNA, and they just took it to the next level. Yeah.
So going back to the look of the film, I noticed at one point during one of the more modern interviews, I assume, that there was a fake film mat that kept it 4:3. How much of that, Una, if that was you, sick, but how much of that, was done in the edit? I didn't, I was really just enjoying the film, and then trying to take like notes, like I should ask about that. But yeah, how much of that was going on? Like the not sitting with the format,
Yeah.
It's very creative instead of just filming a frame,
I never thought I would spend so much time thinking. Judy and I never thought we would spend so much time thinking about aspect ratio, which is which definitely took a lot of discussions and bandwidth as we were making the film. And one of the things, it was a way to unify and to signal to maybe unconsciously signal to the audience of how to group things and how to unify certain elements. So basically, if you go back and watch the film, all the original Immaculate Heart sisters, all their interviews are 4:3. Everyone else is full frame 16:9, and in a way, it was a tip of the hat to unify with the original interviews that Shawnee did over 20 years ago, which were done with the cutting edge technology at the time, which was DV, and which we captured. I still have my DV deck in that closet back there, which we've used, and we up-resed it using a new software that recently came out. But not only that, we wanted to unify everything. So that was a very conscious decision to make the 4:3 for all of the sisters, even the ones that we interviewed later, the interviews that I did. And also for a lot of the films and the archival from the time was also 4:3. And so it was a way to unify visually. The aspect ratio was a way to unify visually.
And we had a clean...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Una, go ahead.
No, just I wanted to add that the first sequence I did, I was also actually, in the beginning, I was going to do all the animation. It's funny that you talk about this. Do all the animation because a lot of Corita's prints are more, it's more squares. And I was that was my first idea actually to have all the animation happen as it was on a big paper, a square on a paper. But we ended up not doing it, but interesting in the context.
And just to add to the 4:3 mat discussion, because there was a lot of back and forth. Originally, we had this very clean 4:3 mat that our finishing house provided to us. And as we got into it, and to go back to that idea of everything being very tactile, I mean, when we got the film scans of some of the archival footage back, we scanned it 4K and 2K, so you could see the edges of the film, and it was just so great. It looked so yummy. So we said, let's make a grungy 4:3 mat that has that feeling. So that's how that came about, and we're glad you noticed it.
Yeah, well, it's what's funny is I'm seeing it a lot more. Right now, there must be an app out there because everyone's doing this 8mm overlay. But the thing that bothers the hell out of me is the picture goes into the sprocket hole. Like, what do you think that hole's there for? Like, it's just a burn or something? Like, that's an aside. Every time I see it on, Instagram, I'm like, what are you doing? Were there any influences for this film, references that you guys were kind of pulling from? Or was this all, aside, obviously, from Corita's art, but... yeah, anything like that you were kind of like, you know what, I liked this from X documentary or X film?
I have to say, one of the films and one of the things that I think triggered and inspired the animation was Yellow Submarine, the Beatles film.
Did you share that with me in the beginning?
Maybe we briefly talked about it. It wasn't a big topic of discussion, but that's a film that mixes animation and live action, and also
I was going to do a completely different thing then.
I don't think they brought it up actually, the Yellow Submarine, but there was another film, The Wall.
And The Wall, Pink Floyd's The Wall, yeah.
One of the things that that Pedro and the edit team did in prepping for not only the animation, but also the motion graphics, we had kind of two teams. Una had the animation team, which were all the character animation sequences, and she had two people working with her, really talented people, animators. And then we had a motion graphics team, which was 6 people in the end, in the last minute, and they put together, all those other textual or audio visualization,
the typography stuff and all that,
all the typography. And for that, aside from Corita, a lot of the influence came from this thing that Immaculate Heart College art department published called the Irregular Bulletin, which was this amazing typographic magazine photographic experiment that has a lot of the same spirit of a lot of the Corita work. So we were definitely playing with some of those references and just being really inspired by the material itself, by all the documents and all the photographs and the film.
And I just wanted to add that, like, starting to work with you guys, I knew you, Judy, but I didn't know Pedro. I mean, it was such a pleasure because the way they approached me is basically, they gave me some references and this is kind of like the story we want to say. And then they were so, they trusted me and just, go, use your own creative, go crazy, have fun. And I really got freedom to, explore a little bit, but just kind of come with my things. And they were so open and just the mindset of how they were working was really enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how
awesome.
I felt too on the set. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna, as this is technically a cinematography podcast, I'm gonna address Emily here for a minute. Going outside of this film, where do you where do you come from creatively? Like, what are your sort of influences? If you could have lit something, like if you were to, are you into dramas? Like, where is your head as a cinematographer generally?
Mm-hmm. So I really am, at this point, these days anyways, really a documentary person, and doing a lot of verite stuff. So where I come at stuff is usually, like Pedro and I, we worked together for a long time and worked on other projects together. And I kind of feel like in a way we've kind of grown up together too. Like, I think I like documentary stuff that is really relationship, how to put this, privileging the relationships of the filmmakers to the subjects and serving what that is, whatever that is, because I think the best stories come out of deeper connections. And so when I approach my work, it's really relationship focused. It's me to the subject, not a direct relationship to the subject, but it's sort of me to the ideas coming up in the film, and then me to the director and the producer directly. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, because I think I'm thinking about it more in terms of how I approach documentary. But in the big picture, I am really a doc nerd at this point, very happily. It's an exhausting profession, so I don't know how long it'll last, but I like it for the moment. And I tend to approach the projects I like the best are the ones where they're not super. The gear, of course, is always present, and you have to be incredibly good at handling all of that. But that's not what I'm interested in thinking about ever. Like I'm interested in listening to the people that I'm filming and trying to find the right metaphors that are around them naturally to try to bring their story out visually. So,
sure. Were there any documentaries that stood out to you when you were getting started that really like inspired you or made you think that was going to be the career path that you wanted to go down?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, like for example, this just goes to show you, because there's no cinematographer on this film. One of my favorite films of all time is Tarnation. And there's no cinematographer on that film. It's very relationship centered, and it is a story that very much comes out of a deep psychological. It's one of those films where the person in the film made the film, and it's all this archival. It's similar in some ways, similar to this one. It's just 100% archival. So I tend to like really weird stuff, and it's not. I mean, I think I got inspired to get involved in documentaries because I really love documentaries, not because I fell in love with documentary cinematography, although it's hard to separate those two things. But a lot of times I'll see films all the time that I think look fantastic. They're not necessarily my favorite films. My favorite films are the ones that, sort of not necessarily, I'm not necessarily just thinking about cinematography. I'm thinking about the people.
Sure. I mean, that's, there is two kinds of cinematographers. There's ones that make super pretty pictures and ones that serve the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm definitely, or at least I'm trying to be the second. I like the pretty pictures. I mean, no cinematographer doesn't, but that's not how you get a great film in my at least the kinds of films that I really respond to.
Sure. And I assume too, especially when you're talking about having to blend in with your subjects and stuff like that, the things that would make a pretty picture, tons of grip, lights, time, spending tons of time
rigging for the camera.
Yeah, is anathema to what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Like one of those things that comes up all the time these days is everyone's always says, "Oh, are you going to use an easy rig?" Which, of course, there's a part of me that's like, God, I would love to use an easy rig.
Yeah.
It makes things a lot easier. But I never do that because the kinds of films I'm on, having something that makes me look that different from everybody else in the room would be completely disruptive. And for lots of films, it's not the case. And certainly for commercials and all that stuff, it totally works. But for true verite films, like you just can't walk in there looking like Darth Vader or looking like something else. You just can't. Even if you're in a room full of Darth Vaders, maybe if you're making a film about camera operators, you could probably do it. But
Sure.
Otherwise, I try to just keep it simple.
Is there go ahead, Pedro.
I was just gonna, in that vein, I actually was gonna ask Judy to repeat her professor's. Actually, it was a big time cinematographer, fiction cinematographer, but gave the best advice in a way that we also try to live by a lot.
It was the other watchword in the making of this. I studied in film school with the cinematographer Woody Omens, who shot Coming to America, and just a lovely human being. And this we apply to everything, largely the motion graphics and to a certain degree the editing, but this is a cinematography story. And Woody would say, when you feel like you've got the scene perfectly lit, you've spent, as much time as the producer would allow you to light the scene, stand back and start turning off lights. And then you'll get to the perfectly lit scene that tells the story. And so it's all about simplifying kind of what you were talking about earlier, Emily, and getting out of the way of the story, and letting the story tell itself in its most simple, elegant form. And we use that over and over again, especially in the motion graphics, just peeling back, literally turning off layers to be able to just get to the essential elements that you need to tell the story, nothing more, nothing less. So that's a story I live by. He had one other story, which we didn't use as much in this one, but it also is great. And I'll tell it really quickly, which is just the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule. And that is that 1/3 of your shots, you pour everything into. It's like, these are your money shots. You milk it for everything you can. 1/3 of the shots, you spend as much time as you're allowed to and get it as good as you can. And 1/3 of the shots are throwaways. And that's when you just have to get it and move on. And I that's also like kind of a rule that you could apply to almost anything in life, I think. There are things that you really invest in, and then there are other things that you can let go of. In order to make the good stuff really, really shine.
Yeah, the theme of, like I said, I've been ratcheting through interviews today and tomorrow and the next day, and a theme that I'm noticing a lot is cinematographers in general are, and I think it's probably has something to do with the new digital technology. You don't need as much light. We're all going back to like really simple, let the location speak to what the lighting's going to look like, maybe modify it a little bit or add or subtract even. But there's just a very, not hands-off approach, but just a very light touch, it seems, going forward, which I'm actually for, because that also makes it easier for young filmmakers coming up to reach the quality, so to speak, that they're seeing in larger films, because, it's not as produced and aggressively massaged.
There's one other way of applying Judy's thoughts and the same kind of concept of simplicity that I think people forget, especially up and coming, is not moving the camera too much. That's a thing that I think you can, if you really slow down, and I think we did this in this film naturally because we were working with older people for the most part, not 100%, but just realizing that when you're filming something and you're feeling really captivated by what you're seeing, I think a lot of people's instinct is to change it. Like, I'm so captivated by this, therefore I must need to do more. But actually, you just need to stop and let yourself be captivated and stay with the moment. And because if you change something, you won't have it on film because you're changing it. There's a piece you're going to miss. No matter how quickly you can get over there, you're going to miss something. And then the other thing is you're going to trigger your subject to get out of it. And so if it's good enough and what's happening is extraordinary, you just totally freeze and just stick with it until it dies, which sometimes isn't for a long time, and you just sort of slow everything down. A lot of times when I'm mentoring, I notice people's footage just has like 5 shots, where if it were me, it would all just have been 1. I wouldn't have moved at all because something really extraordinary was happening.
Yeah, I think it can be easy to get a little too in your head instead of kind of getting lost in the monitor, like, when, especially starting out, I consciously had to make the habit of like, if I'm watching this and I'm interested, then it's probably interesting. I don't need to add to it.
Yeah, and you don't need to insert yourself into it. In fact, totally. You can start to second guess things like, oh, I should get another piece of coverage because they're going to cut it. But it's like, no, you just have to be with it and trust that you'll have time. And, you do have to move. It's not like you can go home with just one angle, but you just have to slow down. Yeah.
Speaking of gear, and then we'll kind of go back to a more general question. Do you see yourself using, like, you said you shot on the C300. Mm-hmm. I currently am shooting on a C500. Have you seen the C70? The little, it's like the C300 Mark III?
I have not. But I keep asking people, other people have asked me, but I haven't shot on that since it came out.
Yeah, I mean, neither have I, but it's I'm wondering if, because that's the first camera that, like, it's in I don't like the DSLR form factor of any camera, but that is the closest I've seen to like a really small cinema quality camera, because it's the C300 Mark III sensor.
Yeah, so I suspect that'll then become, well, I have to see what it looks like, but I wouldn't be surprised if that then becomes the B camera for a lot of shoots.
Well, because going back to your point about getting out of the way of your subject, like that thing is this big, Yeah. So
that's cool. And Pedro and I have worked on a project together. We met like maybe 12 or 13 years ago on a project that was 100% DSLR, tiny, all over the world. And that was really eye-opening. The difference between shooting on, I mean, the C300 is still quite small, so I don't want to put that in the big camera category, but that little 5D, I think it was, that we were shooting on at that point, I mean, I really experienced how profoundly different it was for the subjects. I mean, I could see, I got things and I was in rooms I could never have gotten or been in rooms before. Totally. It was like so eye-opening to me, having, for a long time been on larger cameras.
And the other thing I'm not for Verite. It depends. I mean, each project, has its own unique challenges and needs. But when possible, I prefer, for Verite scenes, I prefer one camera. I am not a fan of two camera Verite shoots, because everything just becomes too self-conscious, and the two camera people then are more worried about staying out of each other's shots, and not the story, and the people in front of the camera are, now that there's two, it just pulls everything out of the story in a way. And I'm a big fan of, like, if the cinematographer is good and Emily is the best, then you don't need two cameras to film Verite scenes.
That's a good
I
note.
totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in situations where we really botched a scene because two cameras, the thing about two cameras people don't realize is the cinematographer has to be good. The B camera operator has to be amazing. What that person has to keep in their head is twice as much as what the cinematographer, the A person does. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to shoot a scene with two cameras, the more experienced person should be B camera. The A camera also has to be amazing and great, but the person who can think about everything and just be more nimble because they're more experienced should be the B camera.
The other thing I learned from Emily is that when your DP asks you for a sound person, listen to them, because I think you said to me, Emily, that if you want the best picture, then get me a sound person. Because I mean, we are not professional sound people, and knowing when to get out of the way and how to manage and do the dance with the DP, especially in verite situations, is so important.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Was this a lot of lav, or were you boomed, or even camera mounted?
It was booming, but it was just not necessarily with professionals. I mean, we were just doing it, but it was did we also put lavs on people? A little bit.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
But you guys always, I mean, the good thing is you can only put a lav on. When you just have a lav on, then you really have one perspective. And you end up having to shoot in a very particular way to capture that. If you have a boom, then the world can get so much bigger, and you can not only see things from that person's perspective and understand what they're going through, but then they, the opening scene of the film wouldn't have been possible if there was just a lav, because we needed to hear what the other family was saying.
We literally have here fantastic intro. First note.
That was me on sound. I just want to take credit for that.
But it's so important that it's not just that lav, because I get asked a lot to just go out by myself with a lav, and it's fine, but it's much more limiting. Yeah. Something surprising can happen. You think it's a one person scene, but it could turn into a 3-person scene, and you won't be able to get it.
Totally.
Yeah, I think we almost always shot with a lav if we had a central subject. Like in that opening scene, Lenore was laved. And Emily always had a shotgun on her camera, just in case.
Yeah, a good one, and then, so it wasn't bad.
Yeah, like a Sennheiser 416 or something like that.
And then I got on this guy.
And then the Sennheiser 416 on the boom as well.
Yeah.
Cool. What camera are you on, Kevin?
Me?
Kenny, sorry.
C500 Mark II.
Oh, cool.
It's just massive it's my favorite camera ever. I mean, I put it up against, I was doing some tests with local runner house, Stray Angel, put it up against the Mini LF, put it up against the FX9, the Venice. Good. I love the Venice, but the C500, it's like so small. The raw light, 6K raw light's amazing.
It's a great camera for verite shooting, if anybody's listening. I've been recommending it for projects where relationship-based, projects that are intimate. It's a great camera.
Yeah, and then I did the extra legwork because I had the footage, I just made picture profiles for all of the Canon cameras, and where they matched an Alexa. So I just, color chart, vector scope, went in the color matrix tools of all the Canons and matched them up so that people could use any Canon at this point, but as a B cam to the Alexa, because I know that's a really popular thing to do. That's cool. But yeah, I'm using that now. Subtle plug for myself. Moving on. I've only got you for a few more minutes. Was there anything that, and this goes for all of you, anything that you learned during the production of this film that made that you sort of like wish you knew at the beginning, or that advice that you would give to someone in a similar position, or someone just starting? We'll start with Pedro.
I mean, I think what we've already discussed, I think is one of what the main lessons. It's let the story lead. Always be on the lookout. What lights do you need to turn off to see what just to really bring the story in focus. But I don't know if that's something I learned on this project. Sure. It's something that was enhanced, I think, on this project, maybe.
Una?
Well, actually, for me, one of the things I learned is that the thing is, usually when I worked on a lot of documentaries, and up until now I was doing it myself pretty much. But this project was different. First of all, I was busy with something else, and secondly, it was a lot of animation.
Yeah.
And just the character story animations. So we brought in Brandon Blomart and Darren Pasemko to really help bring this to life. So I mean, I guess it's not necessarily an advice to other people, but basically just I had to learn to direct my vision as an animation director, while also listening to Pedro with him being the director. And it can be challenging at times, and it's, as things get busy and intense, you try to kind of hold on to what you had in the beginning, but you also have to be very open, and you also have to, when you work with people, I think the first thing you need to know is just to get to know their character, and I feel like that's a lot to do with how you work with people, like, this is how they are, and this is how it works best to. So I'm actually just talking about relationships with people that you work
That's
on.
huge. That's huge.
Yeah. So that, I feel like I learned a lot about that, and and just kind of trying to stick with what you had, but also knowing that things will evolve. Especially, you have to let go sometimes, and you have to be open for things. The animation, it started out very flat, kind of graphic-y from Korea, but it did evolve a lot and that partly because we were trying to really tell stories, and there was more depth that kind of came. We ended up having a little bit more depth in some of the animations, and kind of more cinematic scenes versus graphic scenes. I'm more graphic personally, so it was an interesting learning curve. I learned a lot. It was amazing.
And you were doing that all in After Effects?
All in After Effects. The first sequence and the initial idea was to animate masks only. So basically, all the movement of the characters would be very flat and kind of like these shapes, basically. But
Right.
We ended up. Of course, there was so much work to be done, and there were so many characters. Actually, it's very character based. So in the end, it became a bit of puppet, and you will see that. The animation definitely evolved, but overall we were managing to unify it and the color schemes. But so initially it was mask animation.
For some reason, I never would have thought to do that. I don't use a lot of After Effects, but I would have been the idiot who put in a puppet and then was like, and then the arm goes like this.
You're not an idiot, and usually people. It's just I think they're talking about tactile, and that's probably the reason that Judy contacted me. I'm from like hand drawn stop. Two-dimensional stop motion, where that's what drives me, and actually graphic design too. That's where I come from. So but I work a lot in After Effects, but I always I don't like to use a lot of effects, and it comes from the heart and from the mood and the feeling, and so animating masks with a heavy character animation. 10 minutes of character animation, it's kind of crazy, and
Sure.
Yes, maybe if you have a lot of time you could do that, but inevitably it's gonna evolve and change.
Sure. Judy, any lessons from you?
I think just with every project I work on, every project is hard, every project has challenges, but finding the team of people that you love to work with, whose work and integrity you value above all, and working with them over and over again, and establishing these long-term relationships where you develop a sort of rhythm with each other, and then bringing, you know, and also bringing new people into the fold and nurturing them. We brought several like younger people up in this film, and that is really important too. So, and they'll never get out of our clutches again either, you know. So, I mean, like, you know, Emily, every time I reach out to Emily to say, "Are you available?" She's always busy, but I'm always gonna keep texting her first because, you know, like, you just want to work with great people. I've already talked to Una about another project that she might be too busy for, but you always just want to, you know, work with people who share your values, both on a creative level and just on a human level.
Yeah, totally. And that's it. Okay, but Emily?
This project wasn't, I guess it wasn't like a learn it on this project, but this project really reinforced it. And it's kind of wrapped up with advice for a person starting out as a cinematographer, is I would put a lot of energy into getting, it sounds so obvious, but really getting to know your director. I think this film was a really fun experience for me because Pedro and I know each other well. We've worked on other projects together. We spent time just trying to figure each other out, and, you know, what do you care about? Like, what you know, what is that thing? Is you think that's tacky or you think that's beautiful? Just that kind of stuff. And like, I think there's so much, to me, that's sort of the keys to the kingdom, is trying, you know, as a cinematographer, I see my job as trying to be like a proxy for a director. Like, if they had the skill to shoot this scene, what would they do? And I try to figure that out and try to get to know that person so that I can, you know, kind of do what is in their head that I can't see and try to get it out of them. And I just think that takes time, and it takes relationship building, and it's like such an important part of the creative process.
Well, our time is up, unfortunately. I could talk to you guys for much longer, I feel. But thank you all so much for spending this past hour with me. Like I said, I really loved the film. I've been telling, you know, a handful of my documentarian friends to go see it. And although I'm lucky I got the screener, they got to figure out another way. Yeah, hopefully, you know, our cause will pass again in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for this.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. And if we could just plug, you know, follow us, Rebel Hearts Film is our handle on social media, and it's also our website. So there will be other festival screenings coming up and other announcements about how people can see it. So hope people seek us out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And have a great rest of your day. Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Matchbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/Owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.